Live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gravity Max live stream. So I was just saying my computer is like 20 seconds slow. The time on my computer is like 20 seconds slow, even though it is automatically set to my time zone. Apple, fix this, please. I do not know it is wrong. So we've probably been starting the live streams 20 seconds late in the past, but I guess I corrected for it and started at
Such a grievous error, Max.
Such a grievous. No, okay. I don't think that this is an error. I don't think anyone is really upset about this watching.
Mm-hmm.
I am upset about this, that my computer is 20 seconds slow. That's what I am upset about.
Yeah.
It's inexcusable. I need an accurate seconds timer so that I can like be on time to things.
Yeah. Imagine if I posted a video and it would turn out to be 148 seconds.
I know, right?
I would have to delete my entire channel.
Exactly. It would completely throw off the brand. It is just ridiculous. So, yeah. All right. Here we go.
Yeah.
So
I'm just checking the stream on my phone. I don't know why, but like the default setting for the live streams for me, it puts it on 480p for no reason. You know.
That's very strange.
It's very strange.
Yeah, I have it on 1080p here.
Yeah. So if that's happening for you guys, just throw it on 1080p. We're not shooting with potatoes here. You know.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't know. You also might notice that the resolution is a little bit better. So
yeah, the sound looks good as well.
Yeah. All right. So I think we're just about.
We're ready.
Ready to get going, yeah.
Ready to get going,
I have the social media desk up.
Oh, he has. Wow, nice.
Yeah.
All right, so you'll get chat when there's chat. All right.
That I will.
So let's just jump right into the plugs.
Right.
First, visit the Gravity Max website at gravitymaxmedia.com. We have some fun things there. We talk about this every time. You guys understand. I don't think
you know the deal.
You know the deal. Links in the description for all the social media stuff for updates as well. And then also follow Sebastian on social media. His links to his Instagram and Twitter are in the description, as well as to his YouTube channel, 128 Seconds, where he's got quick 2-minute long educational videos that are like the companion to this live stream. You know, he's got the short videos. We've got these like long podcast formats that you know, some people, depending on their time abilities, I'm not speaking well. I feel like I don't speak well the majority of the time, so I guess this is just me speaking normally.
I think you're a pretty well-spoken guy.
For some reason, I would say it's like this. I have good vocabulary, but bad processing times, because it's like I have too many words to think of, and I'm like, no, I need to use this precise word to get the precise meaning of what I want to say. And so that results in just a lag, a buffering of, oh, no, not that word, not that word, not that word. And yeah, so I am speaking normally, but anyway, check out Sebastian's channel. And then my book, A Bottled Up Flame, it came out 1 month ago on November 1st. And it is the sequel to A Truly Dead Rock, and it's a sci-fi book. So check it out if you like science fiction novels. And you can also check out on the Gravity Max website. There's more information about that. So links to the Amazon in the description. So yeah, reasonably sized objects. Today we are talking about megastructures, which are not reasonably sized objects. So we pranked you with that title there.
When you look at objects, objects have a size to them. Like my seltzer can, reasonably sized. Reasonably sized. I would say it's probably about 5 inches tall, probably about 2 inches in width. Reasonably sized, you know?
Yeah.
I think I have a pretty reasonably sized house. I think I have a reasonably sized car. But today we were talking about some very unreasonably sized things, but they serve a very reasonable purpose, such like
there we go.
getting to space. because
Yeah,
you can't
exactly.
get to space in a seltzer can. Okay.
Exactly. Ha, nice.
There you go.
Very well said. Yeah, so megastructures, just in case you don't know, it's kind of self-explanatory, but the prefix mega means that it is 1 million times larger than a normal structure. So these are structures that are hypothetically 1 million times larger than a normal structure, although that's not precisely what they are. They come in a variety of sizes. However, they just tend to be very big. So yeah, that's what we're talking about. We stray a little bit from megastructures at the start. We have a few things that aren't exactly megastructures, but they are good segues into what are megastructures. So that's our topic for today. And a lot of these have to do with space. They're space megastructures, because there are also a lot of Earth-based megastructures you could have, such as arcologies, or I don't know, I guess just the electric grid could be thought of as a megastructure. And, you know, the highway system. We have a lot of megastructures today, I would argue. You know, if you plant your foot down on asphalt, right, you are connected to an entire continent, you know, an entire continent's worth of track. If you had the ability, when on asphalt, to teleport to any other contiguous piece of asphalt, right? Which is a strange way, but basically, you could get from New York to LA in an instant.
Yeah.
That is all contiguous, one material, asphalt, the megastructure that is our road system. Then I guess railways a bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say, would you say that
yeah.
the Transcontinental Railway was the first American megastructure?
Yeah, again, it depends on what you determine as the boundary, because of the mega 1 million prefix. I guess you could say, in some sense, anything larger than 1,000 kilometers, because that would be 1 megameter.
It's fair.
Although no one says megameter, but that is what it would be, right? Just like how no one says megagram, I feel like these words must be reintroduced into our vocabulary as we build increasingly large objects, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, let's just get started. We're going to start with space transportation. So the first megastructures, and I guess these are the smaller megastructures. Well, some of them are larger than those in the next category, but these tend to be smaller scale. There's a problem with, you know, having a society in space, and that is, how do you get stuff from the surface of a planet to space? You've got gravity wells to worry about, and, you know, that's a struggle. You have to replace your kinetic energy with potential energy, and it's a mess. It's very energy intensive to get to space. And today, our current method is to just get a really big canister of metal, fill it up with explosive materials, and then explode it, essentially, and just let the pieces fall back to Earth or fall into orbit, just discard them. All for the sake of getting a tiny little capsule into space. So that is pretty inefficient, I must say, although it's impressive. And, you know, not to, you know, poo-poo early space flight, right? But it is pretty inefficient if you think about it. And so let's get started with one little boost to efficiency, one little increase in efficiency, which is the reusable rockets. So these are not megastructures, but this will be our segue into megastructures. So as I said, it's really inefficient to have a rocket. Elon Musk, you know, very famous innovator, he said, this is like, I'm paraphrasing a quote from Elon Musk. He said that before he built his reusable rockets, what he said was, the way that we currently do spaceflight would be as if every time you got on a plane, you had to skydive off of the plane at your destination, and then the plane would just crash into the ocean and explode. You know what I mean? So if that were how plane travel operated, we would never travel by plane. It would be horribly inefficient. A single plane costs like hundreds of millions of dollars or something, and a passenger plane, I mean, you can get small planes actually that are cheaper, but passenger planes, very expensive. And if we used them the same way that we used rockets, it wouldn't work. So Elon Musk and others have been working towards creating reusable rockets, and I think it's pretty impressive. I'm not sure what percent reusability, I guess, they have, but currently the SpaceX rocket boosters are able to go up and then come back down and land. I think they have boats that'll catch the fairings, which are pretty much just the shell around whatever you're trying to put into space. So you're trying to put a satellite into space. You don't want it to get damaged by all the wind it'll be running into, so you just put a little cone on it. But then in that, Elon Musk is even catching that. So this is making rockets more reusable. Some of the more recent, there was a Crew Dragon space launch a few weeks ago, I think. But a lot of the most recent launches by SpaceX have been with rocket boosters that have gone up and down like 7 times, which is pretty incredible. So, yeah, all you need to reuse is the fuel here. But that could pose a problem.
Yeah,
so
I think
we'll
this
get into
is
that, but
when space travel gets more and more commonplace, and when it gets more and more thank you, camera, for focusing. When it gets more and more innovations put towards it, I think that we're gonna have to like reflect and look back and say, what are the major turning points of space travel? And I think reusable rockets and what SpaceX did with like the it was the Falcon rocket. That was like the first one too. Yeah, with the Falcon rocket. That's definitely one of the most major turning points, at least from where we're standing in time right now. But I feel like making space less costly and less like you said, like wasteful, like ditching a plane every time you want to take a flight. That's how you get the government interested in it, because NASA lost funding after the Challenger. But before the Challenger, when they had funding, we got to the moon, and they had a little bit of funding when they got to the moon, and then after they got to the moon, they got a lot more funding.
No, I think they had a lot. Here, wait.
Yeah, NASA... what was their budget when in 1960?
I think it was highest during the space race.
That is fair. Yeah.
Because we had to beat the commies.
Yeah.
We couldn't let those commies win. Yeah, so the peak, I believe, percentage... Okay, so in terms of percentage of the federal budget, the peak was 1967. However, that could also just mean that the budget's getting filled with other things, right?
Yeah.
So let me find the adjusted for inflation one.
But yeah, well, you find that.
I don't know. But yeah, I
mean,
think
they had funding. They got to the moon.
Yeah, they had a lot. They had a lot of funding during the space race. I think I think there was a Kennedy speech. The Kennedy, we choose to go to the moon. I think he mentioned in that speech, like, oh, it'll be like X amount of dollars per American household or something, but we have to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But anyway, my point.
So the peak year was 1966 in terms of adjusted for inflation. So yeah. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
My point is that the having the government's backing and having government funding equals possibility,
Yep.
And SpaceX is a, private entity apart from the government, but making space travel more mainstream is a benefit to everyone, including NASA.
Yeah.
So I feel that stuff like reusable rockets, I'm glad we put this first, because it is the step into major space travel, and major space travel is the step into making big megastructures in the middle of space. So we both love space, and this is something that we could see in our life. Like, obviously, we see reusable rockets, but
Yeah.
I'm talking about the megastructures, which
That we're
we'll
gonna
get to. Yeah, it's possible that we might see the like start and maybe even the creation of some of them.
Hmm.
So,
Well, it's really interesting because before Elon Musk and SpaceX even got into reusable rockets, they got into making, single-use rockets much
mhm.
cheaper. And the way they did that was essentially saying, so it's really interesting because what NASA would do is they would contract 10 companies to make the 10 parts of a rocket. But each of those 10 companies would each contract 10 other companies to make the parts of their part. And then those companies would hire 10 other companies to get all the raw materials. And it was just sort of this ridiculous, like, too many middlemen. So Elon Musk was like, okay, this is kind of weird. Why don't we just purchase all the raw materials and then make the rocket? So they were like cutting out the middleman, and that made it a lot cheaper at first, but then the reusable aspect made it even cheaper. So I think it would be very interesting to see like a privately built we'll talk about space stations later, but a privately built like ISS-2, because the first ISS cost like $2 billion. Like, it cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so I know that Elon Musk's rockets, like a rocket launch with SpaceX, is like a factor of 10 less than it used to be with just the government. So I think it would be really interesting to see like a $200 million space station or something, assuming they could achieve that same factor of 10 reduction, which, it's not exactly comparable, but I just think it'll be a lot cheaper and a lot easier to make, which is just fascinating. But yeah, so in terms of our future now, we're going to start segueing into the next thing, but reusable rockets have a problem, and that is that they use fuel, and it's chemical fuel. So it's basically like we got to find two chemical substances that will burn very much for their weight, which is it's about energy density. So, like, technically, if you have a ton of like wood, right? If you have, a massive heap of wood, that will produce a lot of energy. But what you need is a lot of energy coming from a very low mass substance. And so that is what rocket fuel is. But if you think about it, we can't just keep using this rocket fuel forever, because rocket fuel is sort of highly specialized. But then you also have the problem of that, like, all the waste heat this generates just in the atmosphere. Not even like chemicals, because I'm not sure what the waste products are of rockets, but imagine if you have like thousands of rockets going up every day, right? Because if we're a spacefaring civilization, then we would have to, people would have to commute easily. If you work in space and you live on Earth, right, you gotta take a rocket up every day. That's a little crazy. And so I think we're already sort of facing a problem with like planes. I'm not 100%. I don't know that much about the plane problem right now. I think it's just sort of a general climate change thing with planes. So just, any vehicle really. But with rockets is that there comes a point, and you can do the calculations. I have not, unfortunately, done the calculations, but each rocket launch generates some amount of heat. And so if you get to the point where you're having so many rocket launches, eventually it'll be generating too much heat for the Earth to dissipate, which is just a fascinating point. And this could happen a lot quicker than you'd expect, because if space travel becomes so much easier, then interestingly enough, there will come a point where there's this inversion where right now, if you wanted to live in space, like today, that would be, I guess, it would cost too much. It just hasn't happened yet. So you can't put a price on living in space right now. But say 10 years from now, if you want to live in space, it'll be crazily expensive. And living on Earth is much cheaper. But there will come a point in the future where it's actually cheaper to live in space than it is to live on Earth. And that is because of lowering launch costs and just the abundance of stuff in space. There is so much stuff in space, so much land, you know what I mean? Because once you're in space, you can just use whatever's around. And find some rock, bam, you're good. And you've got free energy constantly pumping from the sun, right? And so eventually Earth will become expensive and then space will become cheap. So we can't waste all this space on Earth for farms, right?
Mm-hmm.
So farming would eventually go off planet. And so that will be constantly needing to be shipped in eventually. I'm not explaining this well, I don't think.
No, I got that.
But yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that it's like Earth has a sort of I say has, but I'm speaking as if it's like 200, 300 years in the future. So Earth will have this sort of celebrity status, as in like, oh, it's historic Earth, right? You could live anywhere in the universe, but to live on Earth is expensive because of how notable it is. And with easy space travel and stuff like that, it just wouldn't make sense. Like, Earth would be a very hot commodity, essentially. And so there would be a lot of traffic. And so my point is that the rocket fuel in any rockets would eventually become too much for the planet, for the keeping a stable temperature. So a lot of these alternate things that we're going to talk about rely on some more solid infrastructure and what we could actually call megastructures. Now, this is interesting because let's actually go to the skyhook slide.
Sure.
So imagine it is the year 1800, okay? And you live in New York City, and you want to go to the West Coast, right? Well, you have to take the Oregon Trail. You know what I mean? You have to load up a wagon after traveling out to the very end of there weren't even train lines yet, actually, in the year 1800, but you have to go out. Actually, wait. I should say like 1840, because the U.S. did not own the West Coast. 1850. That's after the Mexican-American War. So 1850. It's the year 1850. You got to take the Oregon Trail if you want to get out west. And that is, there's a lot of things that could go wrong along the way. You could get dysentery, right? As that's the meme from the game. And so you could just run out of supplies. Any bad thing could happen to you because this is uncharted territory. You don't know what you're doing exactly, and you're just trying to get to the west. But now say it's like 1900 and you're trying to get west. You just go along the rails. Simple as that, transcontinental railroad. So rockets right now are like our Oregon Trail because it's risky. Think of how many fatal rocket launches there have been, how many failed rocket launches there have been that have been disastrous for people. The safety is a concern, but also it's just like you're having to trek through the atmosphere, you're trying to get up there, you're making your own path, it's uncharted territory. Whereas if we start to build the equivalents of railroads to space, it'll become easier. So this is the first and like most primitive. This is like a hybrid version. This is the most primitive thing you could sort of have. So this is a skyhook. And so a skyhook is an interesting thing. So you've got a long tether floating in space. Say it is 1,000 kilometers long. It could be any length, really, but say it's 1 megameter long. And so it's floating there, and it's vertically inclined, or not inclined, but it's vertically oriented, so that as it travels around the Earth, the bottom half is directly below the upper half. Now imagine a rocket flies up to the skyhook, to the lowest part of the skyhook, and then simply catches a ride, like on an elevator or something, up to the top of the skyhook and then continues on its way. That makes it easier for the rocket to get to space because it doesn't have to carry as much of its own fuel. It can refuel on the skyhook too. It can do a number of things. And another skyhook trick is to actually make the skyhook rotate. And what that does is that if you imagine a car and you imagine the wheel on a car, I'm pretty sure the point of contact between the wheel and the road, even if you're going at like 70 miles per hour, the point of contact is not actually moving because the bottom of the car, the exact bottom of the tire is not moving. And then the top is moving at like double the speed. I'm pretty sure. if I'm
I'll
mathing.
I'll take your word on it. Yeah.
But that's just a thing of rotation, I guess. It's that if you're moving at forget the car.
Car's gone. It's over.
Gone.
Car exploded.
You're moving at 1 kilometer a second to the left, but you're also rotating with a tangential velocity of 100 meters per second. That means that at some points in your rotation, your true motion relative to the Earth will be 900 meters a second, and then at other points it will be 1.1 kilometers a second. Because,
in human
that
words,
makes sense, right?
In human words, what that means is that if you're going real fast, and you're just going around the Earth, but you're also spinning when you're going around Earth, your speed will actually be varied depending on what point in time you look at, because you are rotating, which is the base of... That's all good, man. This is the base of that skyhook trick Max is talking about, where if it's rotating, then the speed is then varied.
Yes, so the point of this is that if you rotate the skyhook and make it so that when the skyhook is at its bottom, it is moving slower than when it's at its top, then the rocket doesn't have to achieve the same speed to get to the skyhook and clip on and get hooked. So also the rotation allows you to sort of make a slingshot where the rocket hooks onto the skyhook, and then the skyhook starts rotating and slings it out now that it's at the fast part at the top. And so that gives you some free orbital velocity. Except not technically free, but...
So this graphic that we have up, that's only one skyhook, right? That's just rotating? That's not multiple.
Oh, yeah. That's just one skyhook. So this is like each thing is successive in time. It's showing the chronology, I guess. So you get to this point where the rocket hooks on. So orbital velocity just above the Earth is about 11 kilometers per second. So any rocket that wants to achieve orbit, not only does it have to use its fuel to get up, it has to use its fuel to accelerate up to 11 kilometers per second in the horizontal direction. So if you have a skyhook that lowers that speed to, say, 8 kilometers a second, that makes it much more manageable for your rocket to get to space. It makes it just that much easier. Or shoot, wait, no. Sorry, orbital velocity is 8 kilometers a second, escape velocity is 11 kilometers a second. So say that the skyhook lowers your required speed from 8 kilometers a second to 6 kilometers a second. That is very, very useful. It decreases the amount of fuel you need. It just makes things easier, really. So, so that's the skyhook. So I did mention, I said for free, but you got to think in terms of conservation of energy. You always have to think about that with space travel. And that is that, say the skyhook weighs, 100 tons and your spacecraft weighs 1 ton. This is ridiculously undermassed, but say just whatever, 100 units and 1 unit. If your skyhook lifts your rocket up by whatever, it itself is pushed down by 1/100th that amount. So it's sort of like when so imagine you're on a skateboard and you're holding a bowling ball and then you throw the bowling ball. You will be pushed in the other direction. It's just Newtonian equal and opposite reaction, right? So what would happen over time if the skyhook was left unchecked is that every time another rocket used the skyhook to hitch a ride, the skyhook would get a little bit lower in its orbit. It would lose some of its orbital energy. And eventually, that would cause it to crash back into the Earth, which would not be fun. So you have to find a way to supply fuel and power back to the skyhook to allow it to, readjust its orbit. Station keeping is what it's called with the ISS, because the ISS isn't lifting anything up. but what it is facing is air resistance. So the Skyhook would be facing both air resistance and losing energy to rocket launches. So there are two possible things you could do. You could get a huge solar array and try some sort of electrical thing, because again, when you're in space, you get free energy from sunlight, and that energy is more free. Whereas I said earlier, free energy is deceptive with the rocket. This energy is free until 5 billion years from now when the sun goes kablooey, right?
That's the cost. You get
that's
this
the cost.
much energy.
Equivalent exchange.
Exactly.
It is the law of the universe, equivalent exchange. So yeah, you could either use solar panels and to fuel some sort of electrical station keeping, or you could, you could just fly up a rocket filled with fuel, and the fuel is the payload, and then it just stops at the Skyhook, and then the Skyhook uses the fuel. But that's less efficient, so we wouldn't. So ideally, we'd go with the electric thing, if it could work well enough. But yeah, so that's the Skyhook. Again, I'm like, I don't know why I feel like I cannot speak sometimes.
Good.
But I hope that I am explaining.
Yeah, no, I thought that was very apt, because so Skyhooks, would you call them a megastructure? Like, for how big is an individual Skyhook?
Yeah, so I would call Skyhooks a megastructure, because a Skyhook has to be very big to be worth even doing it.
Yeah.
So the International Space Station, for instance, is like 100 meters long, which is very impressive. But if you were to use the length of the International Space Station as a Skyhook, it's like, what are you really doing?
Yeah.
Because space is so huge. A Skyhook would probably have to be at least 1,000 kilometers or 1 megameter to be worth the expense of putting it in place. So that means we would have to find some material that is able to handle the tension of being 1 megameter long, and it would also need to be able to handle the tension of rotating like that. There's a lot of centrifugal force involved, or really there's a lot of centripetal force required. I've been taking Physics 1, and we just got to the unit on circular motion, and that has really caused me to slow down, because centrifugal force is just a shorthand, but physics people don't like it if you use it, you know what I mean? And so I'm like, no, it's centripetal force. I make sure that I never utter the cursed word centrifugal in class. No one has done it yet. No one has said centrifugal. I feel like anyone that says centrifugal in a physics class will get kicked out.
The equivalent to that for debate is if you say, I think, or I feel. If you say that in a debate room, you might not make it out. Because you can't say, I think, or I feel. You need to be, this is, and I know.
That's great. Oh yeah, also if we look at our Skyhook diagram, it actually shows the loss of energy that I was talking about before. The higher dotted white line is labeled as the initial trajectory of the Skyhook, and then the lower dotted line is the orbit after toss, which is, I like that phrase,
the
orbit after toss.
Yeah.
Or well, it's orbit after catch, and then the orbit after toss is even lower. So yeah, the Skyhook loses energy. But yeah, so the Skyhook is a megastructure. It would have to be at least 1,000 kilometers long, probably longer. The longer it is, the better. But the problem is that the longer you make a Skyhook, the more tension is put on the material, and so you need a stronger material. But the problem is that stronger materials also tend to be heavier, which then results in them having to support more weight. So you have to find something that has higher tensile strength per mass. It's all a balancing act, and it's just materials science, essentially. But it's interesting because easy space travel would probably improve materials science, because there are a lot of processes that occur much easier in zero gravity. I think we talked about this a while ago on one stream in distant past, but a lot of processes actually do better in zero gravity than they do in 1 gravity. So we might discover some new materials for a skyhook just by getting into space. So that's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I just had a thought. So I think we've successfully talked about this in every single episode of this season.
Yeah. Oh, what is it?
But the ocean scares me.
Oh, yes.
So the ocean itself, it's water. I know it's water. But inside it, there are massive creatures, right? And the reason why there are massive creatures is because there's a lot of space, you know? Space also has a lot of space.
It does, doesn't
it? Naturally, the constructions that we would build in space would be massive because there's space, you know? Like, if you have this big, giant thing that's going to help all of humanity, where else to put it than the massive, like, closet we have outside, you know?
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, but I just think that, I mean, how cool would this look? You'd be able to see that probably from Earth, you know.
So so it wouldn't exactly look like it would most likely just look like a bright, like, white line in the sky.
Yeah.
And that would slowly change throughout the day. So say, I'm not sure, it depends how bright they are, how reflective they are, whether or not you could see them during the day. But say it's nighttime, okay? And you see like a line, just a thin line, a thin, perfectly straight line of just, you know, white, like starlight seeming, but it's not starlight. Well, it is starlight because it's reflected sunlight. And so you see this just so slowly come over the horizon, and then you watch it go over the horizon, and you'd see the shape sort of change a little bit. You'd see it get longer or shorter just based on the rotation. Because you can actually observe normal satellites passing overhead right now. They look like tiny dots, but it's very interesting when they go overhead because you can tell it's not a star based on how quickly it's moving, but then you're like, that doesn't look like a plane either. It's really cool to see those. I would highly recommend. And so you would essentially see a bright streak pass over the sky and then leave, which is just interesting. But yeah, so the longer a skyhook is, the more effective it is at transferring energy. So that's the segue, unless you have anything else to say.
I'm all good.
All right, so that's the segue into the next thing, a space elevator. So a space elevator. It would have to be a lot taller than this in this picture. This picture, it is too short in this picture, but that is for artistic, quality, to make it look better. Artist liberty. Yeah. Artistic liberty. I guess that's a thing, I think. I think that's a phrase I've heard.
Yeah, no, it is. It is.
Okay. I don't know what's real. Am I real? I don't know.
Oh my god. That should be one of the episodes this stream, determining whether or not we are real.
I think, therefore I am.
It's true.
That's one.
I mean, what a great way to end off the intense season.
Oh, we should do a philosophy episode.
Yeah.
Okay. So, philosophy episode tease. Okay.
Tease,
so now.
Possibly.
Possibly. So a space elevator would have to be 35,000 kilometers long.
In actual units, that's like, what? That's like 50,000 miles?
22,000 miles.
Oh, no, miles is less?
Miles is more than
Miles
kilometers.
Is more, so it's less, yeah.
Yeah, so 22,000.
Yeah.
No, the kilometers.
Yeah, no, it's a joke. It's a joke.
I don't even think about miles anymore. What is a mile? Come on.
It is 21,700 miles.
Disgraceful.
I know. I'm sorry.
So the space elevator is essentially what happens when you get the maximum length skyhook for its usefulness, because like I said, if the skyhook's rotating, then you don't need to think about the elevator aspect. But if it's not rotating, then you think about hooking on at the bottom and then climbing up 1,000 kilometers of track and then leaving at the top. The space elevator is 35,000 kilometers of track that goes directly from the equator up to geosynchronous orbit. So geosynchronous orbit is the point at which an object orbiting around the Earth orbits the Earth once every 23 hours and 56 minutes. That is the sidereal day. It is not once every 24 hours, actually, which is surprising. But that's the real length of Earth's day. So that's also the orbital period of geosynchronous satellites. But yeah, so the geosynchronous satellites stay above the same position on Earth as long as they are above the equator. If they have an incline, then they vary in latitude, but the longitude always stays the same. So if you have an object hanging above one single point on Earth, what's to stop you from just, tying a string between the ground and that object, exactly. Right?
We have some chat from
let's see.
Daikaiju Productions.
Daikaiju Productions. Imagine pressing all the floor buttons on that thing. Oh my god.
No, imagine if it has actual elevator music all the way up.
Yep. Oh my gosh. That would be sentencing someone to death pressing all the buttons there. Yeah. They'd be trapped on that space elevator.
So you have chosen death.
Exactly. But yeah, so it's just interesting. Orbital period increases with altitude. Mm-hmm. So the space station, the International Space Station, goes around the Earth once every 90 minutes, and it's very close to the Earth's surface. So once you get to the top of a space elevator, you are instantly in orbit. Congratulations, you are in orbit. So this is interesting because that means that the top of a space elevator will have zero gravity, because it is indistinguishable from just a normal satellite in terms of just astrophysics, because the tether between it is interesting, but the top and the bottom are just completely normal things that exist. We've seen satellites. We know what geosynchronous satellites are. We get it. We know what the Earth is. We get it. But what's this tether doing in the middle? And so it's fascinating with the tether is that if you were to climb the tether, what would happen in the elevator car is you would feel gravity just slowly level off into nothing. So it would just decrease. It would decrease very quickly at first and then slowly level off until you got up to the height of the space elevator station, and you would be like, wow, I am now in space. So it's really interesting because if you want to use a space elevator to put a satellite into orbit, all you have to do is bring the satellite up to the top of the space elevator and then just push it out a window. And that's it. It's in space. It's in orbit now. And so this is interesting because something we'll talk about later is called a space fountain. And so it is like a space elevator, but not as tall. And the problem with that is that you don't get the free orbital velocity. Because as you climb a space elevator, you are also increasing your speed. Just think about how, so the Earth is rotating. And if you rotate at the same rate, but with a larger turning radius, you'll end up going faster. So that's what happens as you climb the space elevator. You are increasing your velocity until you achieve orbital velocity at the top. And so, what would be the benefits? I mean, there would be a lot of benefits to a space elevator. I mean, it would make space travel so cheap. But again, the problem is material science here. How would you find an object that is sturdy enough, or a material that is sturdy enough to form a 35,000 kilometer tether?
The lab boys haven't exactly narrowed down what element it is.
They haven't narrowed it down. Although there is, we'll talk about this later, but it's something called active support, which is just not a material. But we'll talk about active support in a bit. But when we do, just know that active support could be applied here. And so other problems, I guess, I don't know. There's not really much problem. It's a pretty simple concept. I would say.
It would cost a lot to initially make.
It would cost a lot to initially make, but it would quickly recoup its costs because it would drastically reduce the cost of space travel,
Would
because
a
essentially
space elevator cost less than the Green New Deal?
it would probably cost more. I'm guessing.
I
don't know.
I love how
exactly
that's an actual
much...
question.
No way. I don't mean to be insulting here. I know, what isn't the Green New Deal like 100 trillion or something?
95, 92, I think. Yeah.
Okay, that actually might be similar to the cost of. That actually might be similar to the cost of.
Okay, there's no way a space elevator costs 10 billion NBC.
Okay, no. It's gotta
be so much more than that.
Nope, NBC.
Come
fake
on,
news.
NBC.
So let's see.
All right, I got a 90 billion cost estimate. Okay.
That is 1,000 times less than.
It is 1,000 times less than the Green New Deal.
Oh my gosh. It kind of makes sense, I guess.
I didn't expect this episode to turn into just bashing House resolutions.
Yeah. No, I'm just. Well, I mean, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense because a space elevator is one structure. And the Green New Deal talks about stuff like retrofitting like every house in America.
That's fair.
And if you're gonna like retrofitting every building in America has got to be a more intensive architectural project than even something like a space elevator. But yeah, so
all right, someone on Quora who is
expert Quora.
Yeah, he's an expert. He was a former advanced engineer. So carbon nanotubes cost $100 per kilogram. So I'm guessing that's what the material would be. I guess that carbon nanotubes would be probably pretty strong because they're numerous, but they're also like you can lay them like pipes. A space, like you said, a space elevator we need to be 35 to 36,000 kilometers long. Have a mass of 20,000 kilograms. So running the numbers, cost of taking it to space, at least that. He's giving an estimate of $6 billion. So surprisingly low.
Here's the thing, though. I don't think carbon nanotubes can actually support a space elevator. I think that's the problem.
Do you think? So what material would space elevators be made out of?
A non-existent material. Well, no, because also look up. I mean, no, because this is the thing. How much did it cost? How much did it cost to build the One World Trade Center? The cost to build the One World Trade Center was $3.8 billion. And that thing isn't even 1 kilometer tall, let alone 35,000. Albeit, it is a building, not a tower, like you don't need fully developed floors in a space elevator.
So
However, I think there's something deceptive in the just add up the cost of space travel and the cost of materials. I think there's something deceptive in that. I mean, think of just labor costs. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
The possible materials to be meeting the specific strength requirements are carbon nanotubes, boron nitride nanotubes, and diamond nanothreads.
Okay, that's interesting. So we have some possible materials.
Yeah, whether it works or not, we'll have to see. But I don't know. What would your estimate be? Because these are lower. Because we got everything from 6 billion to 90 billion. And that's those are Japanese experts, Japanese space are saying 90 billion on Business Insider.
Okay, so the International Space Station cost $2 billion.
It cost $2 billion.
Let's see. I don't know. I would say the over-under point is probably about $1 trillion. So I would put 50-50 odds on it costing more or less than $1 trillion. That's what I would say.
I would say lower, honestly, because I think there's a specific scale. Like, it's not linear. Because, like, if you take a $2 billion project, compare it with a $50 billion project, it's not just going to be 25 times as great necessarily, you know?
Yeah.
So I think if we apply that here, I think the 90 billion is ballpark. That they're saying that's the upper shelf, and I think that's a little bull. But these guys, the Obayashi Corp, wants to build a space elevator by 2050, so 30 years, and they're saying 90 billion. I think that's a little
I hope it's cheap.
low for it, but I'm officially right here. I'm calling it.
He's calling it.
I'm calling it right here. I've called a lot of things on this podcast. Not all of them have come true. But I'm calling it here.
Okay.
Obayashi Corp. Elon Musk. Look at me. I'm calling $128 billion.
So here's a question. So I'll take more than 128 billion and you take less than 128 billion. What do you think?
Deal.
So if it's more than 128 billion, I win. If it's less than 128 billion, you win.
Yeah, that does give a considerable amount of advantage to you, but I'll take it.
All right. And we'll bet $128 billion on it.
Deal.
Oh, boy. No deal.
Deal. I've been playing Cookie Clicker.
All right. Well,
there you go.
He's a rich man, yeah.
Oh, very rich
but
man.
yeah, so climbing a space elevator is just like a vertical train if you think about it. And once you pass the first few hundred kilometers, as the gravity wears off, it just becomes like a normal train, really, because you're not working against gravity anymore. It actually would become fairly easy to climb a space elevator from like a car. So yeah, the space elevator, I would guess it would use maglev trains. We have maglev trains. Like there's the bullet train, I think in China, right? That goes like 300 miles per hour, something like that.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good segue into the next one.
Oh yeah, true. But yeah, so we'll finish this quickly. But yeah, so to climb a space elevator, you would want to climb it quickly because again, it's 35,000 kilometers, which is about the circumference of Earth. So if you were going at normal train speeds, which is very slow, it would take a long time. But let's say you were going 350 kilometers an hour, which is like 200 miles an hour. And then, divide by blah, 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 that would take you 100 hours, which is 4 days. So you are going at 200 miles an hour for 4 days, 4 whole days. And that would be the length of time it takes you to get from the bottom to the top. Can you imagine that? That's quite a long way, don't you think? So, quite a long trip. So yeah, that's your number. So they might have to make stops along the way. It would be interesting. Either the car itself would have to be self-sustaining, which is probably the more economical way to do it. Just make the car self-sustaining. But I really like, from just a riding standpoint, the idea of like little halfway hotels that are like halfway up the space elevator. There's a little hotel and you like stop there for the night. Because the gravity there would be like very light because it's halfway up the space elevator. So yeah, but anyway, that's just a fun little concept. So yeah, let's go into the railgun, which is the next one.
Railgun.
Yeah. So the railgun, also known as a space train, is essentially the idea that, okay, what if we take something and use magnetism to accelerate it at massive speeds and fire it away? So originally, it is a gun, I believe. The railgun is a gun that can be used as a weapon. Really, any piece of technology that can be used for good can also be used as a weapon. But yeah, so the railgun essentially accelerates a bullet down a long magnetic track, whereas a normal gun uses gunpowder to do that. So a normal gun uses an explosion to accelerate a bullet down a track, whereas a railgun uses magnetism to accelerate a bullet down a track. And that is actually very comparable to the state of rocketry right now. Rockets are like standard bullets. They are accelerated into space by an explosion, whereas a space train would be accelerated by magnetism. So that's interesting. The picture on the left is more realistic than the picture on the right, in case you need a clarification there. But
that's a really good picture on the right.
I really like the
like
picture
that.
on the right, though, aesthetically.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, look at this picture. It's evoking, like, it's got good, it's like an emotional thing. It's like a metaphor.
It's a what's in a metaphor?
I have no idea what it's a metaphor for. So
here, I got it right here.
Yeah.
The man is humanity and human progress, and the train is innovation and space travel, and it's going to take us out of the station that we've been waiting in since 8, because that's when the train said it was going to be here. It said it's going to be 8, but now it's 8:19 and 27 seconds.
Yep.
Because trains always come late, even in space.
That is true. That is true. Even in space.
That's a good quote.
Yeah, that is a pretty.
That is very Douglas Adams-esque. I gotta
that
say.
Is, yeah. Oh my god.
And it will take us out of the station, and it will reap big benefits. And Daikaiju Productions is back in chat.
Oh, well, what does he say? Let's see. Space hype train.
Space hype train. It's the battle bus.
Oh my god. And it's all that like Red Bull skydiving from space thing.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Anyway, so a railgun used as a space train would essentially require a very long track along, the ground, and it would have to be enclosed and in a vacuum, sort of like the Elon Musk Hyperloop idea, if you're familiar with that. So you take a long tube and you get rid of all the air within that tube so that you can accelerate an object down that tube. Mm-hmm. That is the idea of Hyperloop, which is supposed to essentially be slightly faster than planes, but be just trains. And so the space train would be similar, except what you would do is instead of getting up to a nice cruising altitude or a nice cruising velocity of 700 miles per hour, you just keep accelerating down the track. You just keep going until you are at orbital velocity, at which point you can end the track and just float up into space. Simple as that. A lot of these things are very simple conceptually, very simple in just terms of physics. So say that you're accelerating at a rate of 1 meter per second. So you're just constantly accelerating at a rate of 1 meter per second. It would take a very long track to get up to the 8 kilometers per hour you need for to just be in orbital velocity. That would be 8,000 seconds. So it would take you 8,000 seconds of accelerating at 1 meter per second, which is like a little over 2 hours on this track, and that would give you 8,000 times your average speed of 4,000. I think, so let's see how long of a track that would be. That would be 32,000 kilometers. So essentially about as long as the space elevator, except in this situation, it would be entirely along the ground. Although, if you increase the acceleration, you don't need the track to be as long. So 1 meter per second is very slow acceleration. So likely these things would go at about 1 G, which is 10 meters per second. So you're just in your chair and you're feeling two forces of gravity here. You're feeling gravity downward and gravity this way. And if you do vectors, right, that adds up to about like 14 meters per second in a diagonal down backward direction. And so that would accelerate you to the point at which you could just enter orbit. And so I guess the most difficult, or one difficult thing here is the transition from vacuum tube to air. Because if this thing just stays on ground level the whole time, then the space train will smack into air at 8 kilometers per second, 8 kilometers per second. And if you have ever belly flopped into water, you know that even a fluid can be very painful at quick speeds. So you got to figure something out with that. One thing that we could do is make it so that, you have your space train track and it starts, just going along the ground, but then you find the tallest mountain and have it go up the tallest mountain so that at the top of the tallest mountain it releases, and then you can enter orbit more easily. That's one way to do it. But yeah, so that's the railgun concept. It's basically you take a maglev track, and instead of getting up to a fast speed, you just keep accelerating until you are at orbital speeds.
Yeah, also aesthetically, I like the taking of something old-fashioned and bringing it with like the cutting-edge technology. So
I do like that.
with a railgun train, someone reading a newspaper on a railgun train is like very aesthetically
Very
pleasing
aesthetic.
to me.
That should that fits very well into like a steampunk universe. So you've got the steampunk, they've got their top hats and their monocles, and the train is, it's a train, and they're like going to space. So yeah, that's
and
interesting.
Just like flipping through the Daily Chronicle,
Yeah, exactly.
And then they like look out and they're like a train in space. It's going like that. But anyways.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so this is just an interesting thing because technically you can enter orbit at ground level. Like right now, it's just about speed. It's not about altitude. People think of being in orbit as an altitude thing, but they are almost completely unrelated, because you can be at orbital velocity but not at the proper altitude and just very quickly crash into something, essentially. But you can also be at orbital altitude and not at orbital velocity. If you just teleported 100 miles upward, you would not be in orbit. You would just quickly fall back down the 100 miles or whatever I said. So even though you would enter space, you would just fall back down.
Yeah.
So you have to get both the altitude.
That's an idea. That's an idea for the last episode of Intense Season. I get thrown out of a plane to determine whether or not I hit orbital velocity.
Yeah, maybe we can do that.
I'd also like to mention that train says 128 on it. But anyhow.
Does it?
It does. It says 150,
Which train?
128. The one on the
Oh,
the right.
Look at that. Yeah, look at that. Nice. But yeah, so that's the railgun. We can go to the next thing now. Unless you have more.
No, railguns as a weapon, super cool.
Yeah.
You get the
Cool sci-fi.
as it breaks the sound barrier and shoots half of a mountain off.
Exactly.
But if we can use them for transportation, absolutely. I want to read my newspaper. I want to read the
Me too.
The I don't know. I'm trying to think of a futuristic the Mega City Times as
exactly.
as I'm
the New York Times.
Exactly.
But
anyway.
Yeah. So now let's go to space fountains.
Space fountain.
So this is sort of like a lot of this stuff ties together, and so it's hard to explain it. Like I have these concepts very well seated in my mind, but it's hard to verbalize them. So the space fountain essentially relies on this principle called active support. So the basis of active support is, say that you have a ping pong ball, and then you have a hair dryer. Have you ever done this before, where you take the ping pong ball and you place it on the hair dryer, and then the hair dryer just makes it float because of the air? Have you ever done that before?
I have done that.
Yeah, I think that's a very relatable thing. I think it's like a fun elementary school science thing that people like to do, that you just take a hair dryer and place the ping pong ball on top of it and it stays there.
People are doing that on the Xbox One X because the vents are on the top. So you could put a ping pong ball on it, it'll hover.
That's great. But yeah, so that is a demonstration of the active support principle, which basically says that you don't need a material strong enough to hold up a 100-mile tower. You just need a material to be a sort of medium to transfer momentum into your structure to hold it up and keep it from falling. Mm-hmm. So say that you are floating in the air and you're like, oh no, I am now falling because there is nothing to hold me up, okay? But now say that it's happened, right? Now say that someone fires a 1 kilogram object upward at a rate of 10 meters per second. And then you catch that object and throw it back down at a rate of 10 meters per second. You have changed the momentum of this 1 kilogram object by 20 units, 20 meters per second times kilogram. There is no, force gets newtons, energy gets joules, but unfortunately momentum doesn't get anything. So kilogram meters per second.
We should make it. We should do it.
I know. We got to name it after someone.
Yeah.
Who should get it? Who should get the names?
I don't know. Either you or me. Or no, we should combine them. We should combine our last names.
The Molino-Rudins.
Yeah. MRs. MRs.
The MRs.
Right there.
Yeah, okay. So that is our colloquial name for kilograms times meters per second, the MR. Okay. So you have just transferred 20 MRs into the object that was fired upward, but because of conservation of momentum, it has transferred 20 MRs into you. And of course, you are more massive than the 1 kilogram object, so it doesn't accelerate you as much, it doesn't change your velocity as much. But if someone fires another 1 kilogram object, and you do the same thing, and just you do it again and again and again, if you do it quick enough, you can sustain flight by just changing the velocity of this object. It's very strange, but if you know physics, you should sort of have an idea of what I'm talking about. But basically, gravity is pulling down on you constantly at a rate of 10 meters per second per second. So think about that. You've got 10 meters per second every second. And I know, revolutionary, right? But so if you think about that as a change in velocity per unit time, right? Then if you have two identical objects and one, let me rephrase that. If you have, so for every kilogram, you have 1 kilogram meter per second. So 1 Newton. Gravity pulls on 1 kilogram. Oh my gosh, no, it doesn't. It's 9.8 newtons. Okay, I can't explain this. So
this is the way that I think
is better.
Yeah, the way that I think about it is that if you have water just shooting upwards, that water obviously has force, right? So like the thing balancing on, like the ping pong ball balancing on the air, the water, and as you can see in the picture, like those things could kind of look like tubes, and if you imagine that they're kind of like arced at the top, then at that arc there will be a lot of pressure, and there'll be pressure all over the tubes because it's just the water pressure going through. And that structure, if the water pressure was high enough, could be held up by literally just the water pressure. And if it's a loop, like the same water just going through the arc, there's an arc at the top, arc at the bottom, so it's forming kind of like a loop like this, then the pressure of it can hold up a structure like that without wasting any water. Now, obviously, you switch out water for particles, as you can see in the diagram on the right, with the particle stream. And you can get an elevator going up on it. That'd be really nice.
Exactly.
It's just because it's called a space fountain. My mind immediately went to water.
Like a water fountain.
Yeah, exactly.
Very well explained. So
no, you did a good job too. You were good.
Yeah. So basically, what happens here is that it's just a demonstration of conservation of momentum. So the particles are fired upward from the ground, and then at some point in the space fountain, at the top, or wherever mass is concentrated, the stream is redirected downward. And the result of that is that you have just changed the momentum of your particle stream from upwards to downwards, which means that the building must have momentum upward now. Because that's just, again, if you have bowling ball and you're on a skateboard and you push the bowling ball away, that's what happens. It results in the motion. Newton's third law. So yeah, that's basically the space fountain. You don't need to have a very strong basis. You don't need carbon nanotubes. You could just do this with good old steel, right? But the basic, one of the important factors here is that think back to the railgun, the maglev. The useful thing about magnets is that you can push something without actually touching it, which is incredibly useful because that means you don't have to deal with friction. So if these particles are, say, protons, then you can apply a negative electric charge to curve them back down.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that they can be traveling at incredibly fast speeds, because the problem with a space fountain, with the first analogy I used of like you're supporting yourself by throwing objects back down, is that you could never throw objects fast enough back down. Like you couldn't make massive enough objects go at the proper speeds without like burning your hands off, you know, like every time a massive object slammed into your hands, like it would break your wrists, right? So what you need to do is not actually touch the particles, which is where your electromagnetism comes in. So it's similar to the maglev train in that way. And so, yeah, so you can get a tower that is 100 miles tall. And so what would be the benefit of this? You know, you could use an elevator and climb to the top of the 100-mile tall tower. You know, it's not as long a trip as to the space elevator, right? And now you're in space, except not in orbit. So you still need to find a way to get that tangential velocity. But yeah, and the main way that space fountains are useful is when they are used together. So we'll actually go to that because they're not that useful on their own,
Mm-hmm.
but they are very useful once you string them together. So yeah, that is an orbital ring.
Orbital ring.
Orbital
There's a
ring.
lot of rings. You can see that
Yep.
space loves circles. Well,
Yes.
specifically, space loves spheres.
Yep.
I'm sure you know when you take a fluid into space, it'll go into spheres because that's the gravity of the. But anyways, the orbital ring. Take it away.
Yes, the orbital ring. So the orbital ring is, say you've built, you know, a dozen space fountains in all of the world's biggest cities, okay? Now you want to connect them, and so you do with an orbital ring. And the orbital ring is theoretically, you could build an orbital ring.
This feels like a massive scale IKEA thing. How we're like,
Yes.
first you
Oh
need the
my gosh.
reusable rockets that connects to the space elevator.
Yep.
Then the
Yep.
space
This
elevator is the space fountain. Orbital ring
It's the
connect.
space
It's so
IKEA.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Orbital Ring.
Yeah, with the double I accent.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So, so if you think of one satellite in an orbit around the Earth, now there are two satellites in the same orbit around the Earth,
Mhm.
and because they are in the same orbit, they are staying an equal distance apart. Now you have 3. Now make it 4. So you just keep adding all these satellites, just conceptually, until you have a constant chain of satellites just ringing the Earth. There's your orbital ring, except you have one problem. These satellites, even though they are all connected in one single loop around the Earth, they are still moving at 8 kilometers per second relative to the surface. So if you wanted to, you know, climb up there and then hop on the orbital ring, you would not do very well because it would be moving way too quickly. You know, it's not like a train in, you know, those old movies when the main characters like hop on the train, you know, they hitchhike, they stow away on the train as it's like moving, they like jump on the train.
Yeah.
You can't do that. It's too fast. It's 8 kilometers per second. So what you do is you make a giant maglev track and you have it run in the opposite direction. So if you have your orbital ring that is rotating at 8 kilometers per second, and then you have a train car within that orbital ring that is moving 8 kilometers per second in the other direction, then you will end up with an object that is staying stationary relative to the surface.
Mhm.
So it's basically like the train track itself is moving, and so you place a train on the track that is going at the correct speed so that it stays still. It's like you're on a treadmill, essentially.
Mhm.
So the base pieces of the orbital ring are like the treadmill, so they're constantly moving. So you place a little object on top of that treadmill and have it move in the other direction at the equivalent rate so that it is stationary. And you do that with maglev to avoid the friction, and bam, you got an orbital ring. So the reason you would do this instead of just, having the ring, just placing a stationary ring there, is that if you had a stationary ring around the Earth, its weight would cause it to fall to the Earth. I mean, naturally. Duh, right? If an object isn't in orbit, then it will fall to the Earth. You would need an orbital ring would have to be so incredibly strong to just support itself without anything in orbit. So the reason that you have half of the orbital ring in orbit and then the other half not in orbit is that the half in orbit is generating centrifugal force. So you have one half pushing outward with the centrifugal force, and the other half is pushing inward with gravity, and that strikes a balance. So you just think of it as a balancing of forces. So gravity is pulling downward, but if you have objects that are in orbit, they will want to push outward if they're going a bit above orbital velocity because of their centrifugal force. And so that is what the orbital ring is. This is also active support. This is also considered active support. So it's a balance between centrifugal forces and gravitational forces. So what you do is you hook up your space fountains to your orbital ring, and they become much more useful. So the orbital ring, I would say, is much better than the space elevator. People are very stoked on space elevators. People love space elevators. And I got enlightened to the ways of the orbital ring. And when I found out about the orbital ring, I'm like, no, this thing is so much better than the space elevator. The space elevator is inferior.
So does the orbital ring go all the way around the Earth?
Yes, it goes all the way around the Earth.
So we will finally have the thing on the globe that goes over it, because I've been looking for it and I haven't seen it. But finally, we will have the globe have an accurate depiction of the thing, although it would need to go all the way around. But finally, some justice.
But yeah, so it's interesting with the orbital ring is that they're more useful than a space fountain, because since you have the ring, which is horizontal compared to the surface, once you climb the space fountain and get to the top, then you can use a space train, a railgun, to accelerate along the orbital ring and then build up the orbital velocity and then enter orbit. So it's all coming together, right?
It's all coming together.
So it's interesting because an orbital ring, since it has to be a perfect circle, the space fountains might end up being in sort of inconvenient places, right? Except there's this very spooky coincidence where if you draw a straight line on the surface of the Earth, it connects like so many cities. So if you go through like Mexico City to Atlanta to like DC to New York to Boston are all in like almost a straight line. And then that line also connects with like Paris and I think Milan in Italy. So you get this strange, like, it's such a weird coincidence, but a lot of cities on Earth are hooked up in this straight line. So I would say the optimal orbital ring path would be that one. So you got a space fountain in New York, Boston, these major cities, and you can just get right into space just 100 miles away. Because think about it, space is only 100 miles away, even now. It's just that we don't have easy means to get up those 100 miles because it's up instead of to the side. So much easier to move to the side than upward. But yeah, so the orbital ring, I'm trying to think of what else.
Earth will finally have a ring. I just realized that.
Yeah.
Would it technically then go under number of like the list of ringed planets? It's possible. It's possible.
They would have
even though it's a man-made ring.
They would have to designate man-made and natural. Because here's the thing. Once we build an orbital ring on Earth, why wouldn't we build one on Mars or Venus? Sure. It's useful for any planet. And so, yeah, but this also, people can just live in the orbital ring, because you can put anything on top of the orbital ring as long as you add more weight to the mass of objects that is just spinning around really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to add 1 kilogram of material on top of the stationary part of the orbital ring, you need to add 1 kilogram to the spinning very quickly part. Or you can just increase the speed of the spinning very quickly part, except there will come a point where you're like, this might be going a bit too fast. We don't want to risk anything, right? So you could just build an entire city on top of an orbital ring. Nothing is stopping you. You can just put a dome over it, fill it up with air, and bam. Because remember, you're only 100 miles above the surface of the Earth. So the gravity would essentially be the same. It would be maybe like 95% as strong as on the surface. So you wouldn't have to worry about weightlessness. So it's very fascinating.
There you go.
Very fascinating structure, the orbital ring. It is the platonic ideal of space travel is the orbital ring. Because you can also have elliptical orbital rings because it follows the path of an orbit. And orbits can be elliptical. All orbits are elliptical. It's just that the circle is a type of ellipse, right? So say you have one orbital ring at an altitude of 100 miles, and then you have another orbital ring at an altitude of 1,000 miles. You could either put a space fountain or an elliptical orbital ring between the two orbital rings, and then you can connect to them. And the orbital ring makes it such that you could technically walk, like, from Earth to space. Although, in practicality, you would never do that. You would just use an elevator. But think about it. If you had a space fountain with like a spiral staircase, you could walk from the surface of the Earth to space. And even though no one would ever do that,
someone would do it.
Someone would do it.
Someone would do it.
Someone would definitely do it. But even though the average person would never do that because they just want to, commute. I mean, you don't walk 100 miles to wherever you commute to work every day if you have to commute that far. So the average person wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But the sort of idea, I guess, that you could sort of represents this peak like connectivity. Because with current infrastructure, with a rocket, you couldn't just walk to space. Nor could you walk to space with like a skyhook because it's too high to catch, right? A space elevator you could. You could actually, space elevators give you walkability. And so do space fountains. Of course, they don't give you walkability into orbit. Neither do the orbital ring either, though, but unless you were to run very quickly at a rate of 8 kilometers per second. But yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say here is that the orbital ring is great. We should build one. And I think it would be more expensive, maybe. I don't know. I don't know if it would be more expensive. That's difficult because than the space elevator. What do you think?
Honestly, it's the time-old precedent of theoretical versus experimental. Because whenever you push into a new area of, well, it's not a new area of science.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could designate it. I wonder if this becomes a thing. Would large scale mega engineering? Because that's a cool name. I like that. Let's
right.
patent that right now. Let's get it down.
Yep. Trademark mega engineering.
Do the thing. Anyways, I think that you can't plan for anything. That's what NASA says. That's what Elon says, and all that.
Right.
So.
Actually, no, I do have one final argument for why the orbital ring is actually superior to the space elevator.
Yes.
So the space elevator, say, you build it, it has to be equatorial too, which kind of sucks, but so you build your space elevator over, say, the Galapagos Islands, because I know that's on the equator. So you build your space elevator.
Funny how you didn't go with Ecuador, but sure.
Oh, true. Ecuador. Well, I didn't know where in Ecuador. I guess Quito, is Quito on the equator?
Quito's the capital, so.
It's probably close. So fine. You build, it would be much more convenient in Quito, Ecuador.
Yeah.
So you build your space elevator in Quito, Ecuador, right? But if you want to get to space, that means you have to travel, say, from New York to Quito, Ecuador, or from Paris to Quito, Ecuador.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go from all over the world to Quito, Ecuador. Quito, Ecuador would very much appreciate that. They would become the wealthiest city in the world overnight almost.
Yeah.
Like, if you had a space elevator in your city, you are the one portal to space. You're set, right? But the orbital ring gives you indefinite connections along the, circular path. So your orbital ring, you can set down in Mexico City, you can set down in Atlanta, set down all over the place. You can have like dozens of connections. And so that makes it more practical. That makes it more useful, I would say, than a space elevator. Because the space elevator needs one starting location, whereas the orbital ring gives you many starting locations. And I could even foresee people traveling from one place on Earth to another via the orbital ring when they didn't even need to go to space in the first place. You know what I mean? So, because say you have a very quick maglev track from New York up to the orbital ring, then you have very quick maglev tracks that go across the orbital ring, and then a very quick maglev track that takes you down to the ground in Paris. That might be a lot faster than just like a plane flight from one place to another.
So the orbital ring,
yeah.
I get what you're saying about how it, is more convenient and more like you have to go along the equator and stuff. But I would also say that there's a reason why people are looking at space elevators and, by extension, space fountains more than the orbital ring, just because size and scale of project. Because, again, mega engineering is a new budding science that we patented here. You got that? Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Well, actually, I will add, though, the orbital ring is about 40,000 kilometers long, and the space elevator is 35,000. So they're comparable, actually.
But one is straight up and one is around the Earth. And I think that psychs people out. Even though, there's different things. Building up is easier than building around the entire Earth. So...
I'm not sure.
I don't know. But I think it's going to be baby steps. So whether the orbital ring is more efficient, because it probably is. It is more efficient and it's more convenient. It will probably come later, no matter what, because of the baby steps that you need.
Well, yeah, but you're saying with baby steps, the space elevator itself is a very big step.
It is a very big step.
What I would see as more likely is something like this. New York builds a space fountain.
Yeah.
Now LA builds a space fountain. Now Paris builds like a ton of different places independently build space fountains.
Yeah.
And then slowly they're like, oh wait, we could connect this.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was talking about. So that's probably how it's going to happen, and eventually, like if countries get along, looking at you. Entire global theater. Yeah.
Exactly.
I don't know. But if they get along, then they can collaborate to make an orbital ring.
That is true.
And that's honestly one of the issues I would see with it. For example, if you want to connect Paris, Boston, Mexico City, it also runs through Pyongyang, North Korea. What do you do now?
That is the problem. Is the cohesion required for an orbital ring? I would say that is probably like the political problem makes it difficult.
And that's why just building it just straight, like you said, just each individual thing making a space fountain, it's in their own territory.
Yeah. I don't know. I bet there's a way to build a partial orbital ring. So
probably.
So just think of the active support thing.
It would have to go like that instead of.
It would have to do so. It would basically have to turn around. Yeah. But they already do the turnaround at the top of a space fountain. So say that you want to connect New York and LA, but like you don't like all the other countries are like, no, you must not leave, your territorial waters essentially, right? Then what you could have is particles that stream along the orbital path over the country, like in the eastward or westward direction. Mm-hmm. And then they loop around at the end in like a big tight loop that's say like a loop that's 10 miles in diameter or something that like loops around and it comes back the other way, loops around and comes back. So I think you could actually build a partial orbital ring. So that would be very interesting because you could have New York builds their space fountain, Boston builds one, so they connect up with a partial orbital ring. But then like Chicago builds one. And so it wouldn't actually be a straight line anymore. So this is very interesting because I never thought about this aspect, but you could build like an orbital web, and the orbital web would be supported by active support, and they would all be little partial sections of an orbital ring. So they would all be incomplete little sections, and you could get this little mesh over the continental US or over Europe or whoever decides to build it. Because why even do the full orbital ring? Because that's actually wasteful, because 70% of the planet's water, and so any circular path is going to be like 70% water just statistically along the Earth. So yeah, it's actually a lot better to just do the partial orbital rings. So food for thought there. But yeah, that's a space transportation. Now we got space habitats.
Oh yeah.
Space habitats. So as I said earlier, living in space will eventually become cheaper than living on Earth, which is hard to believe, but it's just a fact, right? Because say that you have, think of how many asteroids are in the asteroid belt. You could turn an asteroid into one of these habitats that we are about to talk about, and you can do it essentially for free. Because on Earth, if you want materials, you have to get all the permits to mine and whatever, but there's just so much stuff in space that there will be so much free land in space. And this is the basic fact. There is more not Earth than there is Earth, right? Very simply put.
Yes.
There is more not Earth than there is Earth, which means that eventually Earth will become a product that has less supply, which will cause the price to go up in the supply and demand graph. So let's talk about ways to live in space that are cheaper than living in Earth eventually. So yeah, so we start.
Gateway.
The gateway. So there are two things referred to as the gateway, and this is one of them. This is the Gateway Foundation gateway, and the Gateway Foundation gateway is essentially a spaceport. So I like that. I like the idea of a spaceport. And then the other one is the Lunar Gateway. It is for NASA's Artemis space program, which I have a video coming out in a month about that. So that's cool.
Nice.
But yeah, so the purpose of a gateway is a hub of transportation. So this is, now we have to rewind a bit, because think reusable rockets again, right? These are sort of on par. So currently, when you want to go to space, you have to carry all of your fuel with you for the whole mission. So you want to go to Mars, you need the fuel to get off of Earth, the fuel to get into the trans-Martian orbit, then the fuel to get to Mars, the fuel to get back, blah, 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 right? But with the gateway, you only need the fuel to get from the surface of the Earth to the gateway, which would ideally be very low altitude. And then you can refuel there. It's like a gas station. It's very nice. Although I don't think the Gateway Foundation would like to be associated with gas stations. However,
it's like their mission statement is, it's like a gas station.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so this is interesting because you might think, oh, why is it circular in shape? What is the meaning of this? The International Space Station looks like someone just slapped a ton of garbage cans together, right? Yeah. But no, it's practical. I love the International Space Station.
You gotta love it.
I'm not trying to insult the International Space Station, but you gotta admit, it's not an ideal space shape. But the gateway is a circle, and what that means is that it can rotate, and if it rotates at the right rate, then you will end up with a experience of artificial gravity. Remember, I talked about centrifugal force, which is the fictional force. There is no centrifugal force, but you feel it anyway. I just want to take one of the all these physics people that are oh, there is no centrifugal force. I'm all right, how about you hop in a centrifuge, then you tell me if there is no centrifugal force. All right. But yeah, so the centrifugal forces essentially push you up against the wall, and so the wall of the gateway it becomes the floor. So you have a circular ring of habitation. It's very interesting. It's like when you're in a car and you turn left or right very quickly, and you swing the other way. It's essentially that, but constant. And so that is that's the only real artificial gravity we have. I mean, in older like space films, you'd have like they'd be like, oh, the artificial gravity, like the graviton generators or whatever. And we may discover that yet, but it is outside of known physics. But what is within known physics is centrifugal force and the artificial gravity that it generates. So yeah, so that's the gateway. Just pretty quick. Let's go to the next one. Unless you have anything on this one. This one's pretty basic. It would just cheapen. It would make space travel cheaper by giving you the refueling option. But yeah.
Yeah, it's like a gas station.
That's enough said. Enough said.
Enough said.
So yeah, so the next one we go to is the O'Neill cylinder.
And this is where things just start going off the walls.
Yeah.
For me, this is the point, because this is when you start getting because orbital ring, very cool, possible if the space elevator is only going to cost 100 billion to $1 trillion, then orbital ring somewhere within that range, probably a little more because it's spanning more. I just mean like horizontally and stuff.
Yeah.
But when you get to stuff like this, it's like, oh boy. Like, there's the price tag, there's the feasibility, and all this. Like, there's the who's gonna sign up for this. I would 100% sign up for this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, look at those beautiful views, right?
Exactly. You would be all the nerds. It would just be like a colony of nerds. Take it away. Explain what this is.
Yeah, so the O'Neill cylinder, this exact design probably wouldn't be used because this is before we figured out like solar panels and artificial lighting. So you may notice the giant windows and mirrors that would reflect sunlight into the orbital ring, the O'Neill cylinder. But that is inefficient. Ideally, like that takes up half the land space. So really you would just have it all be land space and have a giant pillar going through the middle like a fluorescent light bulb. And you would use solar panels to get that energy. But basically this relies on the same centrifugal force principle. So this thing would be like, here, wait, let me look it up, the exact dimensions. I think it's 5 kilometers in radius or diameter. I forget. That pesky distinction between, okay. So it's 8 kilometers in diameter. Okay. It's 5 miles in diameter. So there you go. I think O'Neill was probably American. I don't know. Well, that's an Irish name, but he was probably
let me check.
in America. I think he was with NASA. So,
is by American physicist Gerard K. O'Neill.
Yep. So yeah. So 8 kilometer diameter, so that means it's 4 kilometers in radius. I mean, just think of this picture. You see these sprawling fields here. And it would also be 32 kilometers long, or 20 miles long. So this is just very idyllic, because I think this was thought up in the 50s too. So of course you've got the sort of 50s-esque aesthetic there. Yeah, in 1954, wait, I don't know. Oh wait, no, this is 1974. But anyway, it's like, this is like, it harkens back to a simpler time, like this image, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's what the image looks like, the way it's drawn. But yeah, so the O'Neill cylinder, if it's 4 kilometers in radius, then it would have to spin at a rate of like, I don't know, I'll have to calculate that, but it would spin at the appropriate rate so that you have the experience of 1 g of gravity on your feet. And it would be just like living on Earth, except for some pesky Coriolis forces and the fact that the sky is your neighbor's front lawn.
Yes.
But other than that, completely the same as Earth. So, so yeah, I don't know. There's not much to say about this. This design could be built with modern materials. Like, this could be built with steel. Essentially, if you think of an O'Neill cylinder as a bridge that is, you know, as long as, like a suspension bridge. So that is as long as the circumference. So the circumference of this thing would be about like 24 kilometers, right? So say 15 miles. I think we have 15-mile long suspension bridges, right? Maybe not. But I think you could do that with steel, probably.
Suspension bridge. The longest one is a little over 1 mile.
Okay. But you could do it.
You can do it.
You just need stronger materials. And so yeah. I mean, there's not much to say about this thing. What would life be like inside one, I guess? Well, this is interesting. So we're going to pretty much, the only distinction between this and the ones we're going to talk about in a bit are that they just keep getting bigger.
Yeah.
And the larger the cylinder or ring, just anything circular, the larger it is, the better it is, because you get less and less Coriolis force. So I believe that that direction is north and that direction is south, right? So when I move my hand like that, I am experiencing a minor amount of Coriolis force deflecting my hand like westward, I believe, because south is going faster. No, it's deflecting my hand eastward. So when I do this, my hand is being deflected slightly forward by Coriolis force. However, I do not notice that. I do not feel any Coriolis force right now. What is going on? What is going on is the fact that the Earth is, huge. And I have just moved my hand 1 meter.
Yeah.
And so nothing really happens. Mm-hmm. But when you're on an O'Neill cylinder, it is only 8 kilometers in diameter. And so if you were to jump up or down, which is along the axis, toward the center, the result would be massive Coriolis deflection. So imagine you jump straight up in the air, and then the ground moves beneath your feet, and then you come back down slightly deflected. You would be very confused and disoriented. So you have to deal with that. And imagine playing a game of baseball or something. You'd hit the ball, right? And I just said baseball because, this picture again, 50s, right? So you hit the baseball, and you think it's going in a straight line, but then it just starts curving to the right or the left, and you're like, what is going on, right? But that's just something you'd have to deal with because centrifugal force is, a shoddy knockoff of gravity, but, it's expensive to live on Earth. So this is the cheap knockoff of Earth, essentially, which is just fascinating. But yeah, so another interesting thing is that as you get closer to the center of rotation, gravity decreases. So imagine an O'Neill cylinder that has a built-in little hill in the middle of town. Imagine just walking up a hill and then gravity slowly lifts from your feet. And then you get to the top of the hill and you feel like you're on the moon or something like that. That would be pretty fascinating, topology,
mm-hmm.
Pretty fascinating landscape to have in your town. And I like stuff like that. I just find it fascinating. But yeah, you could use an O'Neill cylinder as a hub for travelers from other planets. So say that you have an O'Neill cylinder in low Earth orbit, and it rotates at a rate to simulate Mars gravity. Then people businessmen or whatever from Mars, who cannot deal with the gravity of Earth, can negotiate trade deals or whatever in the little O'Neill cylinder embassy, because it's near Earth, so it's more convenient, right? But it's not on Earth because they can't go to Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Luna, the moon, would probably be the largest embassy, I think. I could see the moon being a big embassy place because it's lowest common denominator with gravity. It's close to Earth, so it's convenient, but all the low gravity people can handle it. So yeah, but that's not the point. So the point is, yeah, it's an O'Neill cylinder. Not much more to say about this, I guess.
You're a guy that likes cylinders. A guy that likes some
cylinders.
Space cylinders, some
cylinder some space cylinders.
Colonizations. Yeah. So before I said that discs and rings were space's favorite thing. Cylinders. What's a cylinder? It's a lot of discs.
Yeah, that's all it is. But yeah, also something good about this is that you can essentially just mine this out of asteroids, because the size of an O'Neill cylinder is approximately the size of an asteroid. So theoretically, you can just, go up to an asteroid, hollow it out, start rotating it, bam, O'Neill cylinder. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's not as simple as that, but just think about how easy it would be once you're in space to just build things like this and to mass produce them too. You could just have a portable factory, thing that just, travels through the asteroid belt from asteroid to asteroid, and it just gobbles up asteroids and then produces a ton of O'Neill cylinders. Because it's really interesting because like planned communities or whatever. This is the ultimate planned community. You're not merely planning the housing, and the roads. You are planning the entire ecosystem here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because again, you could customize your O'Neill cylinder. You want a desert O'Neill cylinder? Fine, just do it. You want a forest? You could do whatever you want. So these could also be like animal habitat things. Like if Earth keeps getting messed up, right? It can be a sanctuary. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It can be like a conservatory, a wildlife conservatory.
Yeah.
So you could build some like that. But yeah, so let's go to the next one. The next one is the
McKendree Cylinder. I love these artworks because you can immediately tell when they were drawn.
Yeah, why are these? For some reason, all of these artworks are like 50s artwork, except I don't think these were all... Like this guy, McKendree, proposed this in like the year 2000.
Yeah.
I don't know why these are all drawn like this.
I don't know. It's like it's a vibe. You get a vibe from it.
I think I know. It's like retrofuturism. It's the American version of Soviet wave.
Exactly.
So yeah, and if you don't know, Soviet wave is like our favorite musical genre at this point. It's basically just like synth wave music kind of, but then it's got the like Soviet Union flair. It's pretty fascinating. And so McKendree, his proposal was, we just discovered that carbon nanotubes are a thing. What if we were to make an O'Neill cylinder out of carbon nanotubes instead of steel? So O'Neill was basing his thing on like, okay, steel is this strong, so that's how big we can make it. And so the bigger the cylinder, the stronger the material you need. Mm-hmm. And so McKendree's like, we got nanotubes now. So he made one that is 460 kilometers in radius, or 290 miles, and 4,600 kilometers in length, or 2,900 miles. And so it would contain 5 million square miles of living space, and it would be about as much land area as Russia. So this is the size of a small continent, essentially.
Pretty big.
So Russia's larger than Australia.
Yeah.
And so yeah. So it's interesting because since this thing is 460 kilometers tall, with the O'Neill cylinder, gravity goes from 100% to 0% from like the surface to the center. So if you were on an O'Neill cylinder and went up by 1 kilometer, gravity would be 75% as strong. On a McKendree cylinder, you would need to go up by like 115 kilometers to produce the same effect.
Mm-hmm.
What it also does is it reduces Coriolis forces, so you don't have to worry about your hand deflecting to the east when you move it northward, right? And so...
it's the ultimate stop hitting yourself, because you would just keep smashing yourself across the face.
Yep, the Coriolis force. Except it's interesting. We've adapted to the minor Coriolis forces. So people that like have lived on O'Neill cylinders for a long time would just be like, that's normal.
And
I throw a ball ahead of me and it comes back like a yo-yo. Like that's normal.
Yeah. I think I mentioned this in an earlier episode, but snipers, if they do extremely long distance shots, they have to take in Coriolis effect, and for even some shots like curvature of the Earth and stuff like that. So that you have to factor that in as like math. It's a lot of math.
Yeah, that's really interesting because the O'Neill cylinder is like so small that you would have to deal with the concave curvature. So like if you want to like shoot someone that's a kilometer away, you would have to like point upward into the sky quite a bit.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. But yeah, so the McKendree cylinder, think of it like the O'Neill cylinder was about the size of a town. This is the size of a continent or a country. So your McKendree cylinder is your like country. And at this point, McKendree thought, okay, none of this window nonsense. We're gonna have a giant fluorescent light bulb going down the middle. And so that's what they do. So they turn that on and off for day and night. But just think of how like crazy this thing is. Like think of America, just the entire country wrapped up in a little tube, and it's like you can live there. Like I think that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So yeah.
It would be really, like, obviously this isn't real, but it would be so funny if like you're like hey, yo, dude, you want to come over to my house? And he's like, oh, sorry, I'm busy doing chores. And then you just, like, look up and you see him at the mall, and you're like,
You bastard. You lied to me. Exactly. But yeah, so it's like, another interesting thing is transportation to and from the cylinders. So what do you do? How do you leave the cylinder when you want to like go visit your friend in the next cylinder? So what you do is, ideally, they would have spaceports at the two axes, like the two hubs, the two ends of the cylinders would have little spaceports. And what you would have to do is you would have to climb up out of the centrifugal well and then up to the center. So you would probably take a train in the McKendree cylinder just because it's so big. So you'd take a train up to the center of the cylinder, but down the central axis, but on one side of the cylinder. And that's where you would want to put a spaceport, because otherwise, whenever your spacecraft tried to leave, it would like fall into space. But actually, that could be an advantage if you want the bonus speed. So you could do that too, honestly. But it would be easier to get to a McKendree cylinder via the slowly rotating center than the quickly rotating outer parts, because you would have to like bank your spacecraft and have it accelerate alongside the McKendree cylinder. Too complicated. When you could just as easily float up to the center of the McKendree cylinder, dock in an airlock, get out, and then just climb down the walls of the McKendree cylinder into the heightened gravity. So that's how you would get to and from a cylinder like this. But yeah. So now let's go to station clusters. So this is just a hexagonal, this is graphene, but what this represents is that you can just string these things together. So these things are all rotating cylinders. But there's ways, like with maglev, you can add a non-rotating sheath around a rotating cylinder. And the reason you would want to do that is because it's a lot less disastrous if like a meteor strikes your cylinder at like a non-rotating pace, you know what I mean? And if you have an outer layer, it's like you have a second level of shielding from the hull, because that's a big risk of these cylinders, is punctures to the hull. If a meteor comes through, you're not getting like, oh, look at the pretty like shooting star. No, you're getting freaking like busting up through the earth itself. Imagine that. It's like it's coming up through the ground, and then it'll start sucking all the air out, and you'll be like, oh no, this sucks. So yeah. So what you could do with these space stations is that the O'Neill cylinders are tiny, they're like a dozen miles long, a dozen or 2 miles long. So they might want to like federate up next to each other. They might want to connect up, and you could have it connect hub to hub like spokes of a wheel or something, or like this graphene, because if you imagine the little connectors as the cylinders, then they connect at their edges where they have spaceports, and then you have little mini spaceports between, and it's just very nice stuff. You just got a nice little network of stations that cluster together. Because that's I guess what I'm trying to say here is that these cylinders probably wouldn't stand alone, because it's just like, why have one when you can have two? Like, there's no reason not to do it. The only limit, the only limit is that as you get more mass concentrated in one space, you'll begin to develop a gravity well. And you don't want to develop a gravity well, because you are only relying on centrifugal forces. And a gravity well would interfere with that and start messing things up. It would also make it harder to come and go, because spacecrafts would have to fight against the gravity well. And so you don't want too much to federate together. But I could see, like, think of an O'Neill cylinder. Again, it's like town-sized, An O'Neill cylinder is about the size of a town. So imagine like 1,000 O'Neill cylinders linking up together and making like a small protectorate. And like they're a tiny little, like they're a small nation of like, like 1 million people or something. And they're like, oh, we are the O'Neill cylinder nation people. I can't think of a name right now. I can't think of a made-up name. So yeah, so it sort of like for the common defense and stuff. But it's interesting because they're like magnets that like link up. It's like Lego. If one O'Neill cylinder gets really pissed off with like the cluster administration, they can just leave. which is really fascinating. You can just leave, because think about it. Each of these things are independent space stations. And by linking up together, you know, it's helping them for defense and like trade is easier and whatnot. But if like all the other stations are like, okay, new policy, guys, no one's allowed to, what's something that would be outrageous? Oh, no one's allowed to like, I don't know, say prohibition. Say they do like prohibition of alcohol.
Ridiculous.
Right? Ridiculous, right? So say all the stations, they vote in the station cluster. They're like, oh, we really like the 20s aesthetic. So let's remake everything. It's going to be a complete makeover. Everything's going to be 20s now. And then one O'Neill cylinder is like, I do not like this. This is really annoying. We are 50s people. We like the 50s. Come on. And so they're like, all right, you know what? That's it. This has been enough outrage and insults. We leave. We're out. And so then they just leave. And there's nothing anyone else can really do about it. And there's nothing they would really want to do about it, because it's like, okay, you can take your 50s elsewhere. And they go to the other station that's like all 50s, the clusters. They go to the 50s cluster. Then, of course, you've got the 80s cluster. Those people are like, what are you doing? Which cluster would you join? I kind of like an 80s cluster.
80s cluster would be up there on the list.
It would be up there.
I mean, it would be all the golden eras. You know, like if they had prohibition, maybe not the 19... Like, I could see me going on vacation in the 1920s.
Yeah, on vacation to the 1920s cluster.
Or cluster, rather. I could, you know, you just go on vacation there, and you sit in your cafe, and you're like, the year is 1923.
Yeah, exactly.
The stench of this city is now worn off on me, and now I'm one of the vermin, one of the rats running through its sewers. And you just film noir monologue as you're in the exactly.
Yeah. They've got like giant loudspeakers like in the center, like near where the sun is. So like the giant fluorescent light that goes down the middle. You also have speakers playing like film noir music softly.
Oh, yeah.
So just
Yeah.
Imagine film noir music just emanating from the sun.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, and then it stops, and you
crazy.
see the lady in the red dress take the stage and the microphone. She looks right at you.
Yep.
Anyways, I think I could see myself living in the 50s cluster, because
50s cluster?
I really like the architecture, like the interior architecture of the 50s. How everything is that like really vibrant pink, or that teal green. You know what I'm talking about? Like inside the thing, and how things are like circular. I think it would just be really interesting, because in the 50s...
The 50s cluster, that's like the classic retro. It's like the golden age of sci-fi, essentially.
Yeah.
That's what you'd be living in.
I know, yeah.
I'm an 80s fan, though. I like the 80s stuff.
I could see myself... Here, this is probably how it is. I would live in the 80s, but I would retire in the 50s. That's what I would do.
That's interesting. Yeah. And of course, these would ideally just be in architecture only. Everything else kind of in most of these time periods. Pretty much, I would say, in terms of like cultural progress, things just can only, well, not can only, but generally only get better. Mm-hmm. Although in some aspects they get worse. But like the general trend, you know, like this is maybe not 2020 specifically, but like 2019 was probably the best year in human history, I would say.
For social progress? Or
probably, I would say,
you mean just like overall?
I guess in general, I don't know.
You mean prosperity-wise?
I guess, yeah. And I feel like prosperity is sort of included in like, you know, not having laws,
if you look at the actual, but not if you look at how much it's grown since the past year, I would say. Because the most growth in like 1 year, you would look at, you know, big innovations in science in that 1 year, all that stuff. Exactly. But no, I do agree with what you're saying when taking it an actual sample.
I just mean that things tend to get better for humans. There are only brief anomalies to that.
Yeah, and that's positive to think about.
Yeah, it's a nice thing to think about. So in aesthetic only.
Only.
So that's basically the point of clusters, right? all the people that like 50s architecture, they can link up and trade like whatever, you know, they can trade pink paint and whatever other things they need to build stuff, you know. And like all the 80s people, they can link up and trade whatever they need to make 80s stuff.
And there's a prison cluster, and they just play the Eagles 24/7.
Yeah, that's interesting. Prison colonies is an interesting concept. But I don't know what you would really do there. Kind of interesting. Yeah, we didn't think about that enough before this episode, so we're not gonna. So let's go to the next one.
Sure.
Let's go to the Bishop Ring.
Ring.
Yeah, the Bishop Ring. I need to see how big this thing is. So now we're getting to the point where it's like, why have a cylinder when you can just have a ring? And the larger ones use rings instead of cylinders. I don't know why. I guess it's because you can use like the edges of the ring. You can build mountains that are tall enough to keep the air from falling off. So essentially, the cylinders were closed, you know, and so that's the benefit. So the cylinders, you had no sky, right? Your sky was your neighbor's front lawn. You can't see anything. But in a Bishop Ring, other than like a strange bright band going overhead, you have the whole sky to yourself. So you get more Earth-like, you know, less Coriolis force, everything gets better. So Bishop Ring, the Bishop Ring is, how big is it? So it would be approximately 1,000 kilometers in radius. So now we're getting to the megastructure category. We're 1 megameter in radius, right? And so yeah, there are two ways to light a Bishop Ring. Either you have an artificial light in the middle, but that means that it's always directly overhead, or you can have it be on like a slight incline so that as it rotates, like the sun comes in and out of view, except it would rotate too quickly for that. That's actually what the Banks orbital would do, which is the next one. So Bishop Ring, you want the central little like artificial sun. And so yeah, how would you get into a Bishop Ring? So this is an interesting one. What you would do is like, you would sort of fly into the center, but then you would fly downward toward the air, and as the air got thicker, like an atmosphere, it would begin to speed you up so that you were at the appropriate speed. So it's really interesting because think of like re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. The Earth is moving very slowly and you're moving very quickly. So the atmosphere has to slow you down. But in a Bishop Ring, you're moving very slowly, and the atmosphere, the Bishop Ring itself, is moving very quickly. So the atmosphere has to speed you up, which is just fascinating, you know? Again, everything is relative in space, you know what I mean? So, so there's no slower moving or faster moving. It's all just a sense of perspective, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yes, the Bishop Ring is interesting. It would be pretty cool to look at. We have some images in the next slides of like what it would look like from the surface to be on one of these ring things, but yeah, just pretty cool. These things keep getting bigger, and at this size, I suppose you would probably want to switch to like active support, which really just means that you have part of the thing is spinning around very quickly, and then you have just an inert shell on the outside that is just stationary. And that shell would have maglev tracks on it. So the inner ring that is rotating very quickly would push outward, while the outer ring would use tensile strength as well as gravity to push inward. And so that would, you know, keep you in equilibrium, keep you all stable. So yeah, because we're getting to the range where it's like, materials science could probably not deal with this anymore. But yeah, so that's the Bishop Ring. Oh, this is also like Halo. I don't know. Yeah, this is like the game Halo. But yeah. So next we got the Banks orbital. So the Banks orbital is an interesting one, and it comes from the fact that for any given value of surface gravity and day length, there will be a radius of ring that will match it. So Earth has a day length of 24 hours and a surface gravity of 9.8 meters per second. So the Banks orbital is when you pair those two, you know, values, what radius do you need the ring to be to get that? And so what is that radius? I do not know. I do not know, but it's big.
I could
It's a
grab
big
that.
radius. Bigger than 1,000. It's larger than the radius of the Earth itself. So it's like 1 million kilometers, maybe 1.5 million kilometers, something like that.
Has a radius in millions, measured in millions of kilometers. So
okay, so it's very, very large, very large.
Such a ring would have a radius of 1.8 million kilometers.
Okay, 1.8 million kilometers.
So
this is interesting because what you could do is, you see there's no light in the center of that thing. There's no artificial light. So what you do is you have your Banks orbital at a slight angle to the sun, so that as you rotate once every 24 hours, the sun goes from beneath your feet to above you in the sky. And you also get this nice effect where on the right, you have like the horizon, sloping away into the night. Imagine how that would look at night, because the other side would be lit when you're at night. Mm-hmm. So you would be able to look up at night and like look at the beautiful landscapes. It would be like being on the International Space Station, except you're also on the ground, because in the sky you would see continents and stuff. But yeah, another interesting thing about the Banks orbital is that this thing is larger than the Earth itself. It is about, like, that looks similar to Jupiter in size. I mean, this thing is massive. It has a larger circumference than the Earth, which is crazy to think about, right? Mm-hmm. But it is. So that's a thing. So the next one is the Ringworld. This is a book by Larry Niven. Highly recommend. I like this book.
I think that's up there with our most talked about books. Like, if you go
probably
name drop by name drop, I think Ringworld would probably be up there
for the Gravity Max live stream.
Max live stream.
That doesn't represent that it's like my favorite book of all time, but I do really like it.
Yeah.
And I think it's just relevant often.
Yeah.
Is the thing. So it's interesting that it's relevant. So Ringworld. Essentially, what you do is you take a giant orbital ring, really, at this point, and you center it around the sun itself, at about 1 AU away from the sun. And so then what you do is you add another layer above this first ring layer that has a ton of like shades to like block out sunlight to create an artificial nighttime. And it's just pretty cool thing. I mean, look at that thing. Yeah. Very interesting. But also, again, it's massive because it goes around an entire star. And I think to simulate Earth gravity, what you would need at 1 AU is the thing would have to be rotating around the sun at a rate of like 9% the speed of light. So it would be going around very, very quickly here. And it would be trying to tear itself apart too. So you would need a massive outer layer, just like with the Bishop Ring I was talking about this. You need to use the active support here. In Ringworld, Larry Niven uses it's built by an advanced society, so they have better materials, which is a respectable path to take. But barring any advanced materials like that, we would have to use active support. So it's pretty interesting. An interesting effect here is that this applies to the Bishop Ring too with the artificial light, is that when your source of light is in the center of the ring, it always appears directly overhead. So it always seems like it's noon. They talk about that in Ringworld, where he's like, wow, isn't that strange? It goes straight from day to night, just like a curtain sliding over the landscape. Because, you just essentially have a giant umbrella, just sort of, like, it's not even, you don't have day and night here. You just have day and eclipse. It's just, it's very interesting, a very interesting landscape. So that's the Ringworld. Very big, but cool. So next, we got the Lightspeed Ring.
Oh.
Quick. Okay. I'm putting the censored bar over this. My eyes hurt, but basically it's Lightspeed because it's blurry because it's Lightspeed. Okay.
But the blur effect we found is highly nauseous, so you guys only saw it for a split second.
Yeah, this is just the standard blur effect. It hurts my eyes.
All right, the censored is over it? Okay, thank the Lord. Censored. we almost destroyed our entire viewer base.
Yeah, exactly. So it is rotating at the speed of light, or technically, 1 kilometer per second less than the speed of light, just because you can't actually get to the speed of light. And so this is the theoretical maximum size that a circular habitat using centrifugal force could be. This is the maximum radius you can have, because as the turning radius gets larger, so too does the velocity required to simulate the same amount of gravity. So if you want 9.8 meters per second, then there is a maximum radius you can have for that. And that maximum radius happens to be about 1 light year, and that's just a complete coincidence. But yeah, so this thing would have a radius of about 1 light year, and it would be rotating at a rate almost that of light speed. So the people on it would be experiencing extreme time dilation from speed. And so it would just be very interesting, because this is the maximum. So you can't build anything bigger than this that uses centrifugal force to simulate gravity, other than say you can have one with Martian level gravity that's larger, because you don't need as fast a speed for Martian level gravity, so you can get larger radii, and then lunar gravity, and then all the smaller gravities. But this is the maximum for Earth-like gravity. And so this is the most you can do. So it would probably require active support, and it would be interesting because it's a light year across. If you were a light year away from the sun would look like just a random blot, a random star in the sky. Just oh, that's an oddly bright star in the sky. Nothing too notable. So if you had a light source at the center of a light speed ring, you would either need a red giant, we have red giants sometimes. So if you took a Betelgeuse, that's a star, if you took that and just put it in the middle of the light speed ring, that might supply enough light, but I don't know. But if you wanted to use stars like the sun, you would have to gather a bunch of these stars and just have them orbit in a little ring slightly within the orbit of the light speed ring. So very interesting. This is the most mega of megastructures. This is a gigastructure, I guess you could say. It's a gigastructure. So yeah, because it's the theoretical maximum for centrifugal force. So yeah, that's it. Now let's go to the next one. The next one is shell worlds. So remember about orbital rings, right? I was talking about orbital rings, and I'm like, oh wait, you could also do an orbital mesh, and you can also place cities on top of your orbital ring. So what if slowly over time, more and more material is placed on the orbital ring until you get to a point at which the orbital ring just engulfs the whole Earth? Bam, you've got a shell world. You've got the top layer and the bottom layer. So yeah, now you have to deal with that. You have to deal with lighting problems here. But yeah, you can build layers within layers within layers and make a planet that has multiple surfaces. And if you were to just use weather controls to put a bunch of clouds in the air and have artificial lighting, the people might not notice, you know what I mean? And in this picture on the right, they're using pillars to hold up the sky here. So it's like Atlas. It's like Atlas, with the world on his shoulders, right? So it's very interesting here. It's just an interesting thing. But what you could also do with a shell world is just create a world from scratch. So instead of using rock and stuff, rock and metal is very valuable stuff because you can build space stations out of it. So instead of using rock and metal and stuff, what if you just crammed a ton of hydrogen and helium into a very small space? Because those are kind of useless. Actually, no. You want the hydrogen for fusion, right? So just helium. Helium is a waste product. No one likes helium, right? Helium sucks, okay? So you just take all that helium.
It cries in most ideal gas.
Cries in helium. So you just take all that helium and highly pressurize it, put it inside a planet, and then that gets you gravity. So the shell world is the artificial alternative to a planet. So it's you had the ring structures used centrifugal force. The shell world is artificial, but it uses gravity, like actual gravity, not artificial gravity. The thing is artificial, but it uses gravity. So it's OG. It uses gravity, and so yeah, it's original. You know, very very authentic. If you want to get that nice Earth, I could see in the future, just because you have so much space, right? I could see like hundreds of Earth knockoffs. People are like, oh, I'm building this. It looks just like Earth. Like, come live here. And so all the people that are like, because basically, you would probably have it such that like the really, really rich people live on the Earth because again, it's like expensive. It's hard to live on the Earth. So the Earth would be like, you know, it's rare. So the Earth would be like, I don't know, what's a very rich place, you know? It would be like
Luxembourg.
Yeah, Luxembourg. Earth is like Luxembourg here. But then you would have all these shell worlds that are like knockoffs that are meant to look like Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so this would be where all of the like aspiring, like not quite rich people would live. So it would be like, I don't know. Well, I don't want to insult any particular town here, but I have a town in mind. And well, it's very obvious. It's just our town. It's just our town. So the knockoff Earths would be just our town. Right? Like that's so you'd have Earth would be like, you know, the town closer to New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's named like a town in Britain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that would be the Earth. Our town would be the knockoff Earth. That's the inside joke.
Indeed.
And so yeah, our friends know what we're talking about. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, another thing you can do is instead of using helium, if you can figure out how to make like Kugelblitz black holes, which are another thing, they basically just, if you put a lot of mass in one spot, you get a black hole. But what if you put a lot of energy in one spot? Well, you could be like, well, that's not the same thing. But energy and mass are the same thing, so look at that. So bam, you get a small black hole that is, you could just put it at the center of a planet and then build a shell around it, and bam, the thing generates gravity for you. And it generates energy from the Hawking radiation, so bingo bongo, right?
There you go.
So that's your shell worlds. So now let's go to the Birch Planet, which is the maximum theoretical shell world, just as the Lightspeed Ring was the maximum theoretical ring. Here we got the Birch Planet. So as a black hole gets larger, to maintain the same like surface gravity, you need to get closer to the event horizon of the black hole. So if you had like a black hole in the center, so we are like 6,700 kilometers away from the center of the Earth. If you placed a black hole at the center of the Earth and wanted to experience the same gravity, that black hole would have to be about as wide as like a coin, right? So it would be just a few centimeters across, very, very tiny. And so think of that comparison. You're 6,000 kilometers away, and this thing is just a few centimeters wide. But as the black hole gets larger, so now you have a black hole that's 1 kilometer wide, you'll be a lot farther away, but not as much farther away. So the black hole went from, say, 1 centimeter to 1 kilometer, which is a factor of 100,000, but your distance from the black hole to get 1 g of gravity would not increase by that same factor of 10,000. It would increase by, say, 1,000. And the result of that would be your larger black holes would slow, like there's a limit, essentially, just like with the Lightspeed Ring. And so that limit is the Birch Planet. It is very massive and very wide. I don't know exactly, I'm looking it up, because the last one was a light year across, essentially. And so where is the Birch Planet in size? I don't know.
I could try.
But yeah, we have a G2 type star, like the sun, essentially, for reference. So, oh, it says a diameter of about 1 light year. So just think light years. So again, this is about the same size as the Lightspeed Ring. That actually kind of makes sense. I'm just thinking about it now because, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense because essentially the event horizon of the black hole is the point at which you have to move at light speed to like escape it, right? And so the light speed ring is moving at 1 light speed, and you end up with 1 g of gravity. But this is doing the opposite. You're feeling the gravity. Anyway, if you see the connection, I don't know. Whatever. I'm not explaining that. I don't need to explain that. I see the connection. So
he sees the connection.
A G2 type star is put there for reference in the bottom left. So look how big this thing is. Again, what would you do? Would you get like Betelgeuse, another red giant star, or would you put a ton of tiny suns in orbit around this planet? Think about that. The sun in orbit of this massive planet. And another thing about this Birch Planet that's just interesting is, again, it's walkable, right? So it's a light year in diameter. So that means its circumference would be like 3 light years. So if you had the time, you could walk 3 light years in a straight line around an entire Birch Planet. What do you think? How long would that take? That would take a very long time.
Someone would do it. Someone would do it.
Someone would do it. Well, someone would do it if they had if they were immortal, because I think it would take probably billions of years, dude. I have no idea how long that would take. That would take how long is a light year? How big is a light year? Light years to meters. So, oh my gosh, 9.4 times 10 to the 15.
Damn.
Okay, so let's just say 10 to the 16. Oh, well, then it would be 3. So 3 times 10 to the 16 meters, but then say that you walk at a rate of 3 meters per second, okay? So now we got 10 to the 16 seconds divided by 86,400 would take 1, so 10 to the 11 days divided by 365.2421 days gives you 316 million years. So it would take you about as long as the dinosaurs lived to walk around this entire planet. So that's the scale of it. But it is technically walkable. So
you could do it.
If you have 316 million years to kill, why not visit the Birch Planet and take a nice little stroll, right? So yeah, that's the extent of our megastructures, except for one more. So that's the extent of the habitats. But yeah. So now we go to energy collection.
Energy's good.
Energy.
Yeah, we need it. You got it. I got it. We need it. How do we get more of it? Don't know if you guys at home know, but stars are just greedy little things. They're holding on to all their energy. Thankfully, we created solar power so that we could kind of get some of that stuff off of it. But they still got a lot of energy in there. So we create something to open them up, take the energy, give it to ourselves, and then we have a massive star just hanging around to boot. That's cool, So this is in the form of the Dyson Sphere.
Yep.
With it, you can run. Yeah. You could probably run. Anything. You could run Doom on it.
Doom, yeah. A Dyson Sphere can probably run Doom. Yeah.
It cannot withstand 3 PS5s. However.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, Dyson Sphere.
We've talked about this one a lot.
We've talked about them a lot. So yeah, it just collects all the energy of a star. I don't think we need to talk about this one much, but just want to point this out that most of these megastructures have to be fueled by a Dyson Sphere. Just think of active support. That's one problem with active support, is that no one really wants to build an active support structure, because as soon as there's a power outage, the entire thing will fall down. That's not good for business, So say that you build a beautiful tower, space fountain thing, except it's not an entire space fountain. Say that it's 5 kilometers tall. It's revolutionary. 10 years from now, everyone's like, whoa, you just built this 5 kilometer tall building? That's crazy, right? And you're like, yes, I used this new technique called active support. And then the power goes out and you can no longer launch your particles up through the stream, and the backup generator doesn't kick in. The whole thing would collapse. So that's a problem with active support, is that you need to be very certain that you have enough energy and that there won't be any power failures. And so a Dyson Sphere is, I guess, a way to supply that energy. But yeah. So yeah.
There you go.
I'm tired.
Yeah.
Let's do final thoughts, right? Unless you have anything else to say on Dysons.
Dysons are cool. I want one. It could, I want one.
I want one too. I'll build one around Proxima, I guess.
Proxima? Alright.
Yeah. You can have, what, Barnard's Star?
No.
Those are comparable.
I'm taking the sun, baby.
He's taking the sun.
I will
he's
black
taking Sol.
out the sky.
Fine, you know what? You know what then?
Earth.
I will just go ahead and take Alpha A and Alpha B. All three of them.
Look at him.
All three of them. What do you think about that?
I say we have a competition. You get Alpha A, Alpha B. I get or G, or we have a G what?
G2.
G2, yeah. I get our G2. We get 50 million years each, and we get all the energy from our star.
Okay.
Who can write a better book?
yeah, I think that's interesting. Well, for what it's worth, I cannot back up this claim, but you know what? I shall stake a claim to the Alpha Centauri system, just in case that carries any weight in the future. Maybe one day, right? 1,000 years from now, they'll go back through the archives and they'll be like, wait, this guy claimed the Alpha Centauri system first, so it's actually his.
Yeah, exactly. In like the vast, vast future, the entire universe is run by the principle of dibs.
Yeah, dibs. I call dibs on Alpha Centauri.
That's another very Douglas Adams thing.
Oh yeah, that would probably
the transnational corporations wanted to take over the Proxima Centauri system, but recent data and technology found that some jackass in 2020 called dibs on it. So now we have to revive him.
Are like, yeah, exactly. Or his descendant, him or his. I'll put it in my will. Exactly. My claim to the Alpha Centauri system.
Yeah.
So yeah, I am now. Can I put that? Can I like add that? Can I make that my title at the end of like whenever I talk to people? I can put that on a name like a name tag thing like that they have on desks. You know, like the boss. It's like, you know, General Executor of blah blah blah. I will be Max Rudin, claimant of the Alpha Centauri system.
There you go. No, and that reminds me.
Business cards.
That reminds me of the Idi Amin thing.
The what?
He's this African title. He was this African military officer who served as the president of Uganda. And he was a super cruel tyrant. You know.
Okay.
And
wow,
all that.
Thanks for the comparison.
No. His title.
Oh, okay. Yeah. What was
his self-proclaimed title? I need to find it. Hold on. Yes, this is it. His full self-bestowed title ultimately became His Excellency, President for Life, Field Marshal, his full name with a doctor. VC, DSO, MC, CBE, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and its fishes of the seas, and conqueror of the British Empire in Africa in general and Uganda in particular.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great title.
And his nickname is Kijambia, which means the machete. So
nice.
That's all you need to know about Edie. I should do a
video on him. You should do a 128 seconds on him. But yeah, so final thoughts.
Half of it will just be me saying his title.
Honestly. Yeah, exactly. So, today we learned about megastructures. I hope you learned something. I hope you learned about how active support works, how it's an interesting thing, like it's a loophole to get around tensile strength being a thing. But yeah, you know, we always build taller and taller buildings. You know, this is just an extension. As humanity expands, so too must our structures expand. You know,
mega engineering.
Yeah, mega engineering, the new field. We gotta We got to create more expansive things if we want to be able to branch out into space. Because that's the thing. The Earth is finite, you know? There's the finite carrying capacity of the planet, you know?
Its
we can only
resources, finite.
Yeah. Exactly. We can only support so many people on Earth. And so if we want to support an increasing population, we must expand into space. There is simply no way around it. Either we stop growing, you know, we stop increasing the population, or we have to acquire more resources in space. And so these megastructures assist us in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's my final thought here.
There you go.
Yeah.
I think we're good.
Yeah. All right. I am tired. I felt like I couldn't speak. I felt like I had like some sort of mind block between there. So I don't know what's up.
Still a great episode.
Yeah, still a great episode. Fun to talk about. I love megastructures. They're like one of my favorite things. It's just like futuristic stuff. I have a ton of these in my book, so check that out. I love this stuff. So yeah, thank you guys all for watching. It's been fun. Thank you, Daikaiju Productions, for participating in the chat, and thank you, Sebastian, for being my co-host as always.
Of course.
Yeah, and so.
And we invented the unit of measure, the MR.
Yeah, the MRs.
I like it.
I don't think it's gonna take off.
You know what?
We invented a lot of stuff this episode. We invented mega engineering, the MRs, and I laid claim to Alpha Centauri. So.
Exactly.
Very productive episode, despite my weariness. So yeah. Thank you all for watching, and
bye-bye.
Goodbye. Nice.